What's up, everybody? It's guubums again, and I'm back again with another comp guide. So for those of you who don't know, there's a huge patch coming in about 7 hours, 5 hours. That's going to pretty much entirely shift the meta. Like, the patch is really, really big. I'm gonna leave a link in the description below for the patch notes. But pretty much it's a huge patch, and if you know anything about the current meta, it's that it's very much reroll dominated. But as of right now, like, this is going to be really a prediction video. Like, I can't say for certain that these are going to be the best comps, but judging by what we know about the changes, judging by like kind of like what I've heard from a lot of the other different pro players in North America, these are probably going to be the best comps, and largely I agree. Just given how the changes have like gone thus far. Obviously, Riot Games kind of like talks about how they don't really want balance thrashing all that much, but it turns out that like when there's a game as complex as TFT, there's just going to be a lot of balance thrashing with the different patches, and I don't think this one's really much of an exception. And yeah, so I'm just gonna get right into it. So the very first comp I want to talk about is this Invoker Comp. It's like standard 6 Invokers. Obviously on the sidebar it says like a bunch of whack stuff. That's only because like these two are going to be replacements for these two. Obviously late game you want to be playing around Ahri and Ryze. Early game you want to be playing Set and Cassiopeia because obviously you don't have access to these until later into the game. And real quick, like, this comp is actually something I played a lot of going into the most recent tournament. I was actually practicing this comp a lot. I was hoping that it would actually be good. It turns out that after like losing 300 LP with it last hatch, it's not the best, but fortunately Riot actually buffed this comp in pretty much every way possible. They buffed the comp in the early game, they buffed the comp in the mid game, and they buffed the comp in the late game. They buffed Ahri significantly. Ahri was already probably one of the strongest units in the game in the previous patch, except obviously she struggled with units like Zed, units like Darius, which would have a lot of HP and then would eventually just be able to one-shot her. And even though her single target damage is really high, if she has the opportunity to like kind of like get it off, it's really difficult to actually get that opportunity because her single target damage hinges upon a unit. Just like in TFT in general, that's just not going to be like really easy. So even though they have like Zeb 3, Katarina 3, and we can expect perhaps like at the end of the fight that these two are going to be the only units remaining, just for the most of the fight, that's just not going to be the case. And then with Ahri's like insane cast time, she was often just going to get killed like during her casts very often. So pretty much they made her cast a lot faster. I don't exactly know how much faster. Like, obviously it's difficult to describe, but we'll see in a couple hours when the new patch hits. But regardless, any buff to Ahri is just going to be like a really strong buff. And I think that's like kind of your late game insurance because Ahri is just going to be the best late game carry in the game. If not her, then it's Velvet, but it's going to be one or the other. Obviously, this comp, Ahri slots right in. You also get to play Ryze. They are buffing one of the weaker Ryzes, which is Shadow Isles. They're not changing all the Ryzes, but obviously, even in the current live pack, there's a lot of Ryzes that are like just really, really strong. So just being able to play these two late game legendaries probably gives this comp a really high win percentage. Also, even though it's not like exactly a reroll comp, this comp still is kind of a reroll comp. You do want to go for Karma 3. You do want to go for Lysandra 3. With the buffs to Tarek being enormous, by the way, pretty much they're changing his mana. They're cutting down his mana cost by pretty much half. And there's going to be some Soraka buffs as well. Pretty much this comp, you really just can't go wrong. You can reroll it. You can not reroll it. Expect to see this comp pretty contested, especially early on in the patch. But the beauty of this comp is that you don't actually really need to hit your 3 stars, do well with it, because you can play around these late game legendaries. If you get some early direction for it, you can just like push levels. So the main items for this comp really are just going to be Sunfire Spark plus Karma items. So Karma items is just any damage. You'll notice that I didn't put Blue Buff or Shojin on Karma. And the reason for that is because like the best Karma build actually doesn't make use of either of them. Especially when you have 6 Invokers, you don't really want to be using Blue Buff or Shojin, obviously, because like they give you mana, but the thing is like you're already getting so much mana from your trait, and even from Ionia as well, that you don't really want to be getting more mana. But that being said, like it's common misconception that like it's completely unplayable when you have Blue Buff and Shojin on Karma. So the beauty about having Blue Buff and Shojin is oftentimes you're slamming these in the early game, especially Shojin, because Shojin can be used in like all these different comps right now. It's one of the best items in the game. If you put a Shojin on your Karma early, she's just going to be a lot more effective throughout the early and mid game, which allows you to get to this board a lot quicker, a lot smoother. You'll notice that like if you have a Shojin in the early game, if you don't have a Soraka 2, then you just probably have to put on your Karma, because like Karma's a lot less effective in the early mid game when you still only have like 2 Invoker or 4 Invoker, maybe you don't have an Ionia yet. So like if you think about like a standard level 6 board, obviously these have to go. But like a standard level 6 board is going to look like pretty much this minus 2 Invokers. So like if you get this, then your Karma is going to be strong, but that's only because you have Shen, right? So like let's say we're missing these two, but say like Shen's missing altogether, then we have to like get the Ionia some other way. Maybe that looks like Aurelia, maybe that looks like something like this, and then we're playing like 3 Invoker, 4 Invoker, 5 Invoker, something like that. And then pretty much Shen is just so integral to this comp that before you have Shen, pretty much slamming the best items you can is just going to be really impactful, just because like Shen pretty much fills up all your synergies, right? It has synergies with the Karma, so if you're playing Karma carry, then obviously Shen's going to be really strong. Pretty much you really do want to get to level 7 quickly with this comp because you don't really have access to Shen all that reliably when you're level 6. So even though otherwise you would actually probably want to roll level 6 for this just to like stabilize, especially if like your early game didn't go that well, you just pretty much can't do it all that easily just because you're too reliant on the Shen unit. And then the thing is, Shen holds Sunfire Spark so well because he's pretty much just the tankiest unit in the game if you just like factor in all the resistances he gets from like Ionia. If you fit in Bastion, which in this comp you do, Shen's just the tankiest unit in the game, so he just stays alive until the end of the game. Yeah, Gunblade's one of her best items as well. You just want generic damage on Karma, and then you want to have like one source of MR Shred on your team, and whether that be in the form of Spark, Shiv, or later on in the game, say like you have a +1 somewhere, maybe you have a +1 Ionia, +1 Invoker, you put the spat on, you know, Heimerdinger, and then maybe you don't have to play set. And then you can get the Shrink Ray to get Shred that way. Same idea with Anti-Heal. You want at least one source on your team, whether that be Morello Lissandra or Sunfire Shen or Heimerdinger, or even like in some cases you're in one of the Zon portals. Zon Rise, certain rises do give similar effects to that. So just look out for that. You do want one of these sources. The best one is going to be Spark and Sunfire, partially because they make the best use of your items. So like this comp and most other comps right now don't really have a use for Cloak. Spark is one of the best items in the game, and obviously it kills a Cloak. Yeah, it's just like one of the more reliable forms. Also, just because Shen is so tanky, it's just so good on this unit. Same with Sunfire. Obviously, Chain and Belt don't really make any other items with the exception of maybe Guardbreaker and Shroud. But like Shroud is very much like a luxury utility item that you do probably want late into the game, but it's not going to be one of the core items you're looking for. So yeah, that's pretty much this comp. The main augments that I really want to be looking out with this comp are going to be Loving Invocation. It's just like the Invoker specific augment. A lot of like these comps have like specific augments tailored to their trait. So in this one, the Invoker one is going to be the best, Loving Invocation. Otherwise, like Invoker +1 is reasonable. That way you can ditch Cassio a lot earlier. Then you just get to fit in like one of these high quality units. Sometimes like your +1 allows you to just play the board on 7. So if you actually notice the board doesn't really fit on 7, you do really want to go 8 with this comp. This is the standard level 8 comp, assuming you don't have RA. If you're missing just like one of these, then you're losing out on something like important, right? Either you're missing out on 3 Ionia, in which case Karma does a lot less damage, Shen's a lot less tanky. You're missing out on 6 Invoker, which like that goes without saying is probably a big deal. And then, I mean, those are the only 2 real traits you're running. So you do really want to probably try to get a +1 with this comp a lot of the time, just so that you can stabilize really hard on 7. If you don't have a +1, you do really want to go 8. And normally if you're playing on level 7, the stuff you do remove is 6 Invoker. It's unfortunate. I mean, most of the time you won't have a Rise. So realistically, you're just getting rid of a Galio and a Cassiopeia. Maybe you're playing 2 Tarics. Maybe you're playing a Taric. Maybe you're playing 2 Lissandras. You could just play like a random unit. Like maybe just like a random J4 that you get. Maybe a random 5 cost. I don't know, Aatrox or something. It doesn't really matter. So on 7, so if you just imagine this board without Rise, without Galio, and then just this is your board on level 7, just like a random unit, just make sure you're getting that 3 Ionia and 4 Invoker in, and then pretty much after that it doesn't matter. And then obviously, once again, you want to be playing 6 Invoker on 8. So this is like, I talked a lot about this comp just because it's like one of the more niche comps. It's not a comp that's been that strong kind of like thus far. Loving Invocation got nerfed after the first patch, so it was actually pretty strong in the first patch if you got the augment, but otherwise it wasn't going to be that strong, especially if you consider in the past, Karma is one of the more contested units, Karma and Shen especially, just because like any of the Ionia players, if they're playing Challengers or they're playing Ionia, you're going to see them take, you know, a lot of your Shens and a lot of your Karmas out of the pool, and especially if that comp is like 3 or 4 way contested, obviously these units are going to be a lot harder to get. You should expect this comp to be contested on live, so that's probably still going to be an issue, but if you do have the spot for it, you should definitely look for this comp. And we currently think that this is going to be the best comp in the meta, but it's hard to say, obviously, without seeing the actual patch in action. Next up, I have 6 Orcs. So this comp has been, thus far, pretty terrible, honestly. But now, after the strategist nerfs and some Lux buffs, and obviously a lot of the reroll nerfs, a lot of like the best comps in the current meta being nerfed, this is probably going to be up there because it just didn't get touched that much, and because they made Taric like a real frontliner. So this is going to be the standard comp you play if you don't have like a +1. Obviously, Orianna could be like Malzahar, like it really doesn't matter. I mean, at the end of the day, you do want to obviously play 6 Sorc. That's the name of the build. It's like 6 Sorc Lux carry. There's pretty much no one else you can play, so if you don't have a spat, you will have to play one of these 1 cost units. It doesn't feel the best, obviously, because they are 1 cost, they aren't that good. But otherwise, like if you do have a spat, then you could probably just play like a Shen or something. Something to beef up your front line a little bit more. Otherwise, like any of the 5 costs are reasonable. So you can always play like a Sion on your board. You can always play like a Senna on your board, just to like lull you over until you have like something that you actually actively want to play. Something I will make sure that you guys pay attention to is this Aatrox unit. So Aatrox is probably one of the least liked units in the set in terms of like power perception. Like a lot of people think he's really quite weak. And for the longest time, I actually did too. I thought this unit pretty much did nothing except for like, was kind of like a ZZ Rot. He would die, give your team some HP, and then, I don't know, just keep dying, and then he wouldn't really do much. He did receive a lot of buffs in the new patch, but even before the buffs, I was actually cautioning them against buffing this unit, just because I actually think this unit's really quite strong. So reading just like what Darken does real quick. When Aatrox dies or the holder of the Darken Blade dies, the Darken Blade is equipped to the nearest allied champion, granting them 400 HP and 15% Omni Vamp. So what that means is like Aatrox dies, feeds Swain 400 HP, and then eventually Swain will die, and then feeds, like say Taric is still alive, feeds Taric 400 HP, and so forth and so on. But the thing is, like, if you think about it, so Aatrox has like some base, I don't know, I think it's 1150 HP at 1 star. So let's say he does 0 damage. Let's say at no point in the fight does your Aatrox do any damage. Let's say he dies, feeds 400 HP, feeds 400 HP, feeds 400 HP, so forth and so on. By the end of the fight, you fed like already 2000 HP to your entire team on top of the 1150 that you have by yourself. It's just like there's no one unit in the game that if you need frontline, if you need effective HP on your team, that can match Aatrox in that sense. Like, so even if Aatrox is doing literally 0 damage, and that doesn't even count the Omni Vamp, right? That's just like literally 400 plus 400 plus 400. But obviously if you get onto Lux, if you get onto Ahri, for example, or even just like a Vel'Koz, and they cast a single time, that 15% Omni Vamp can represent like another, you know, 200 to 500 HP, depending on like obviously how much damage your unit has done. So just like don't sleep on this unit as like a random one of. You can't fit it in this comp. This comp is like relatively rigid, I would say, just like these 8 units. But obviously, if you have like a +1 sorcerer, then, you know, Orianna can go, and then you can just fit anything on this. This is one of those units that you're gonna have to watch out for. This is going to be true for every comp, so I figured I'd just mention it now. I didn't really mention it in this comp because I think this comp doesn't really struggle with frontline. But like I said, you actually can. I did mention that you can play them, but I didn't exactly explain why. The beauty of like these two comps is like they literally use the exact same items. So Sunfire Spark is like the most standard AP frontline item in the game. Not only because they're like turbo strong in the early game, it's just they fill out like everything you want. And once again, they're just really good for your item economy. Like they use up components that you don't really want, obviously with the exception of Rod for your Spark. So yeah, if you have Sunfire Spark, you can literally play any AP comp. So obviously these two comps are going to be like the newer comps that you haven't really so much so far. But obviously if you still want to get into like standard Ionia, Kai'Sa, Yasuo carry, Yasuo didn't get nerfed, so it's a little bit weaker, but like you can play pretty much anything with these two items slammed. Same with Vow, it's like generically still the best tank item in the game even after the nerfs. Pretty much, yeah, you're looking for these 3 types of frontline items. A mana item on Lux, it can be blue buff or Shojin. It's just Shojin tends to be better in the early game, so I put Shojin, but obviously it can be blue buff. And then like your third item could be anything. It could be Guard Breaker, it could be Gunblade, it could be Death Cap. Pretty much, you don't really have to think about it too much. Oftentimes, it's a Radiant item, which is why I didn't even put the third item on it. So you have 3 item J4, then you're going to get a Radiant item on Lux because of Demacia. Otherwise, like say like your items worked out in a way that you have 3 item Lux, then maybe it's okay. Like maybe you're missing one of these items, and then it's fine to have your Radiant item on J4. Pretty much, I wouldn't think too much of like, oh, I need to get my Radiant item on J4. I need to get my Radiant item on Lux. It's not like so much about that. More so, it just matters like the items that you do have, the items that you've made already. You want to make the best of them, right? So like, if giving my Lux a Radiant item meant that I'm forced to put my Giant Slayer on Orianna, for example, I don't know, it's a fringe example, but like if this is the case, then that's not worth it. So I'd much rather have the Giant Slayer on Lux and give the Radiant item to Jarvan. As for augments with this comp, you're really just looking for any generic AP augments, like obviously Sword +1, Strategist +1 is still reasonable, like you're still getting something. So even though Strategist is getting nerfed, it's not going to be completely useless, so you should look out for that. Stuff like anything that gives your Lux healing in the form of like maybe Cybernetic Leech is going to be good. This comp is lacking frontline a little bit. Obviously J4 and Swain and Taric, especially after the buffs, are going to be pretty reasonable, but they're not like crazy good frontline. So like certain augments that give you HP to your entire team, such as Transfusion, such as Cybernetic Bulk, you might want to look out for just because they give your team a lot more frontline. Obviously your backline is doing a lot more damage. Also, if you do have a Sorc Spat, I will say Sona is definitely one of the better Sorc Spat holders in the game. Obviously, once again, Orianna gets dropped and you can just replace, you can just put any unit in. So if this is a comp that's really good if you have +1 because you can roll on 7 for it. Obviously, if you're rolling on 7, you're not going to be able to have that much access to Ahri. Obviously, you can still high roll it, but you know, any random 5 cost is reasonable, and then you can just play 4 Sorc until you get to level 8, or once again, you could just play around Ori or Malzahar, especially whichever ones you have upgraded from the early game. So, and just very quickly, I'll talk about like how to get into this comp. I'll actually go back and talk about how you get into the Invoker Comp as well a little bit. Normally, this comp is played from Void Opener, so that's generally going to look like one of these. Ideally, both of these two, plus one of the early game Voids, which is going to be one of the Cho'Gath or Kassadin. So Cho'Gath, normally, like your level 4 board, you just want to be playing Bruiser with it. Obviously, Kassadin pairs really well once you have Taric, but you know, even if you don't have Taric, it's just like 3 Void is still a really strong board. It did get nerfed in the patch notes, but I don't think the nerf is nearly big enough to actually like make Void not one of the best openers in the game, especially since they nerfed the other best opener in the game, which was Ionia. So yeah, this is just like, this is going to be a comp you really want to be looking out for. Just Void Opener into this. You can just stack Vel'Koz from early game and then remake him late game if you have to. Otherwise, just rerolling Vel'Koz for a 3-star is still going to be really strong. So just look out for this comp for sure. Very quickly, just how to get into this. You just play generic stuff. It doesn't matter. It's like the same idea, right? Like you're really looking for Sunfire Spark on pretty much any of your early game units, and then you start stacking your backline with like Shojin, GS, JG, Guardbreaker. Like these items that just generically good on any backliner with the AP lean, which is like generally when you have Spark and Shiv and stuff like that, you're going to AP lean. Obviously, if you have Shojin, you're going to AP lean, stuff like that. The board you play with this to get into it, generally speaking, will probably have like a Cassio 2 on it. We'll probably have like a Soraka on it, and then you just like slowly but surely build on it. Otherwise, like an Ionia opener, otherwise like a Karma opener. Those are all super reasonable. And then 2 of the next comps are going to be comps that you've already seen before. Aphelios got a huge buff in the upcoming patch. So he got a 5 AD buff. He has 60 base AD to begin with. So that's like close to a 10% buff. I mean, that 5 AD obviously to a lot of, especially newer players in TFT, is going to seem really small. But if you consider the fact that literally anything Aphelios does uses his AD, that 5 AD is actually just enormous. So like obviously all of it, every single one of his auto attacks is doing 8% more damage, right? His ult is going to be doing, 8% more damage and so forth and so on. And then like if you have a Giant Slayer, that 8% gets boosted some more. Obviously, when you star him up from 1 star to 2 star, it gets multiplied by 1.5. So it's pretty much that 5 AD is no joke. And then once again, they did buff Tarek. So something to keep note of is that they nerfed 3 Freljord, but honestly, 3 Freljord is like one of the most busted traits in the game. We already know like Shroud is like the strongest late game item in the game, just because of like if you're shrouding the enemy, if you're Zephyring the enemy, these 2 items are like widely considered the 2 strongest items in the late game. Pretty much if you just make it so the enemy team can't act, it's gonna be really strong. And the reason why 3 Freljord is like actually significantly more broken than Shroud in my experience is that like if you get it mid round, pretty much none of the units on the enemy team are gonna get their second cast, bar like low mana units such as Lux who have like 40 mana. Obviously, if you're mana reaving a unit that has like 40 mana, that's just like for Lux, that's like 1 extra auto attack, right? But like for a unit such as like Senna, for example, like even if she has a Shojin, if she's getting mana reaved, she has 150 mana, multiply that by 30, it's gonna be 30% after the nerf, so 30%. So that's adding what, 45 mana to her cast? That's 5 extra autos, right? So like Senna is just never casting a second time. So oftentimes like when 3 Freljord procs, units that have casted will probably not cast again. And that's true for like units like such as Shen, right? If we just hover Shen real quick, 140 mana, Shen's not gonna get another 140 mana, and then on top of that, another 50 mana because of the mana reave, right? Like that's just not happening. Obviously, certain units, Shen's like maybe the exception just because of how tanky he is. But like for example, J4 will never get a second cast. At least thus far in the set, Sejuani will also not be getting a second cast. However, they actually buffed Sejuani dramatically. Pretty much what they did was, if you've played Sejuani in the set so far, you'll know that she's really, really frustrating because she'll ult and then she gets her shield after like 50 years. You're sitting there waiting just for her shield to come up and it just never shows up, right? But obviously after the changes, she's going to get it immediately. So that's going to help Sejuani cast a couple more times. Generally with this comp, you really do want to be playing 3 Freljord, especially after the Sejuani buffs. You want to be playing at least 2 Deadeye. Something that you can play, by the way, is 3 Deadeye. So for example, like if you say you don't have Auction yet and you're playing like Soraka still, like this is actually a fine board. So like obviously it looks ugly because you're playing 3 Deadeye, but like this is not something you should shy away from if this is what you have, right? Oftentimes when people are like going into their comp of choice, they're going to be like, okay, I need these units. If I don't get these units, I am screwed. Obviously, in the case of Aphelios and to a lesser extent Urgot, that's going to be the case. Like you cannot really replace Aphelios that well with other units. Obviously, Zeri works in a pinch. Jin's like one of the best item holders. Also, like 2 Deadeye, 3 Ionia is still going to be a really good opener to get into this comp, just in general. So like if you're item holding Jin, that makes sense. Otherwise, like if you upgrade a Zeri, you could play Zeri until later you swap back into Aphelios. That's something that people were doing a lot, really common in the first patch in the opposite way. So they'd play Aphelios because they have Aphelios too, and then they swap into Zeri. Obviously, back then Zeri was like much more dominant. Currently, we believe that Aphelios is going to be slightly stronger than Zeri, but they're both most likely going to be viable. I do have them both in the top 4 comps. That's something to keep in mind. Shen is also like not the most important thing. Obviously, it does give you Invoker and Bastion, but Bastion tends to not be all that important as a 2 trait. You'll notice that obviously like in the current patch or in the set thus far, Bastion has not been played, even though you've been playing Shen like super commonly. Obviously outside of the Bastion meta, but like that goes without saying. You just pretty much want to prioritize these items. This is like the true best in slot for Aphelios. I don't think it gets any better than this. Same with Urgot. It really doesn't get any better than this. If you do have a Lost Whisperer, this is like an item that a lot of people are afraid to build just because they're playing 3 Freljord and they think that's enough. The thing with 3 Freljord is that it kicks in 7 seconds into the fight or 8 seconds into the fight, and your team's actually doing a lot of damage during those 8 seconds because also by then 2 Deadeye procs have already happened. So each Deadeye proc happens every 3 seconds, right? Those Deadeye procs actually kill units, and Lost Whisperer dramatically amplifies the damage that those Deadeye procs are doing, even though they're on like a backline unit, right? So yeah, don't be shy about slamming Lost Whisperer. You can even put it on Aphelios. So say you just don't have this Giant Slayer, just putting the Lost Whisperer on him is fine. Otherwise, just put it on Ashe or Urgot. Just like fill out these units. Make sure these 2 units are getting their 3 items if possible. Obviously, tank items are also important. But like, just don't be too shy about slamming this item, especially if there's a lot of big tanks in the game. Yeah, that's pretty much how you get into this comp. And then standard frontline items, Vow, you'll always notice is going to be the best. Stuff like Gargoyle, stuff like Bramble, I'm sure is still going to be good. Declaw actually just got buffed, and with these 2 comps being the perceived S tiers, you do probably want to consider like having a declaw. But at the same time, the thing with declaw just in general is that like if you have 2 cloaks, you just slam a declaw, because cloak is like generically speaking just like a pretty bad component. Like I mean, if you just look across my team, you have exactly 1 cloak and it's BT, and the thing is like BT is not even necessary. So like cloak is like the least useful component. That's just been true in TFT in general. So yeah, if you have 2 cloaks, slam a declaw. If you have a cloak on a chain, most of the time you're slamming a stone plate. Just pretty much you want to get rid of your cloak as fast as possible just because it's a bad component. Hurricane is fine. If you noticed before, I had Auction with the Hurricane. They nerfed this build specifically, but it doesn't mean it's going to be that bad. Like Hurricane's probably still a fine item on Auction, but the better build is probably going to be like, if you're playing around Auction carry, it's going to be like something like this, and then maybe like an IE. Something like this is just going to be like the standard Auction build. Honestly, I could even see Last Whisper, just so that like if they have a unit tanking in the middle, your Last Whisper Auction will just like blow straight through it, right? Otherwise, like this is a pretty standard comp. Like a lot of us are probably used to already playing this from the first patch, so I probably don't have to speak too much about it. And then finally, we have Piltover Zeri. I think there's a good chance Zeri is going to be good without Piltover, but very quickly, like in case you haven't played this yet, maybe because you started the set late, this is like the generic Zeri Piltover build. You want to start open the game with 3 Piltover. You want to get to 30 energy on your T-Hex, which is, assuming you lose streak consistently, it's going to be 7 losses to get to your 30 stack T-Hex. And then obviously you win on your 8th round and you cash it out. So playing Piltover in the current patch, you probably don't want to be playing it later than 2-2. Obviously, if you played the first patch, you would know that Zeri was so strong that you were willing to play Piltover as late as like 2-5, 2-6. Even in like weird cases, as late as 3-1, and even playing it without lose streak, just because Piltover and Zeri were that strong. If you played Piltover on 2-5 or 2-6 and you got baited into playing Zeri, your average placement was just going to be really good because you were playing Zeri. Like, yeah, that's something you should be happy about, right? So this is a standard build. I think like the 3 Zeeks build you used to see back in patch 1 is not going to be optimal at all anymore. I think in general, you probably just want 1 Zeeks. And then otherwise, the key components are still going to be Last Whisper. Last Whisper Zeri is like by far her best item. It's way better than Rageblade. Please, I know Rageblade's fine on her. I know Rageblade's even good on Zeri, but like please prioritize your Last Whisper on Zeri before getting your Rageblade. The beauty about Rageblade, I've talked about this before, is the fact that it kills a rod. You'll notice that you don't want a single rod in this comp, especially with the nerf to Locket 2 patches ago. Rod is even worse. So like you used to actually just build a Locket and just like put it on Jinx for your backline, just so that like Zeri doesn't get randomly sniped by random stuff. But you can't do that anymore because Locket sucks. So one of the best ways to kill Rod is going to be Rageblade. If not the best way to kill Rod is going to be Rageblade. But that being said, you still need to be mindful about, like, for example, going for your Rod for your Rageblade is a terrible play. Do not do that. It's just like, 1, you can't do anything with your next Rod, and 2, especially if you don't have a Last Whisper yet, like you do want to be prioritizing that Last Whisper. Otherwise, like you probably can Locket frontline again. They're buffing Locket back up a little bit. It's still probably a terrible item, but it's not like so terrible that it's completely unbuildable like it is currently on the current patch. So look out for that. I think like there's not too many ways to kill your Rod right now. So yeah, just be careful about that. Otherwise, like Giant Slayer, Guardbreaker, generic items, even QSS is fine, like Rageblade, RC, all these items are like, this unit uses pretty much every item. And the new patch will bug fix Robotic Arm on Zeri. So before, you just never put Robotic Arm on Zeri because it didn't work. It literally did not work. So now you can actually put Robotic Arm on Zeri, and it's probably going to be really quite strong on her. If you do have Robotic Arm, I would say build stuff like Hurricane. So this is going to be something like you're going to have to check. Obviously, your Zon mods are not removable. But you can check them early. So like you don't have, 2 Zon in, but you just have like an Echo and put in a Warwick, check your 2 Zon. If it's Robotic Arm, you should lean towards items like Hurricane and Deathblade. The reason why, okay, well, not so much Deathblade, but Hurricane for sure. Just because like Hurricane's just gonna be the best item to multiply off the consecutive attacks from Robotic Arm. That's just the way it works. And the thing is, anytime you have a Hurricane, there is no better item in the game to pair with Hurricane than Deathblade, because like Hurricane, the bolts don't scale off anything. So if you have a Giant Slayer and it says like deal 20% extra damage to units with 1600 HP or more, the bolts from Hurricane actually do not do 20% extra damage. That's just the way the game works that way for a while. The only thing is, like, if you're doing 50% of your attack damage as a bolt to like a nearby enemy, the thing is, like, obviously Deathblade is the single highest AD giving item in the game. So normally you don't want Deathblade on Zeri, obviously, because Gunner is giving you a bunch of AD, 11 by 8, so 88% at 4 at max stacks. So you want to be building other stuff such as like crit in the form of IE, Last Whisper is like an armor shred, Guardbreaker is giving you percentage damage increase, same with Giant Slayer. But when you have Robotic Arm, when you have Hurricane, even though your trade is giving you so much AD, you just still probably want to be building a Deathblade if you can. Once again, item economy is like a really important kind of like skill in TFT and kind of like a really important aspect of TFT. So like if you don't have 2 swords, you can't build a Deathblade. You can't greed for a Deathblade. So in those cases, obviously, don't be afraid to build a Giant Slayer. Don't be afraid to build an IE. Don't be afraid to build even a Gunblade. Like, okay, be a little bit afraid to build a Gunblade. It's not very good. You do want to be building damage on your Zeri, but like in a pinch, like Gunblade is not the worst item, right? So you do have to make the best use of your items. And then yeah, otherwise, like the augments to get into this comp very obviously is dueling Gunners. Otherwise, just like generic battle stats is going to be really strong. Tons of stats. Long distance pals, even after the nerf, is going to be really strong just because like your long distance paling your Zeri and Urgot. Urgot has a crazy high base AD. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but obviously you're putting these items on him that also give him more AD. And then obviously Zeri benefits from that. And Urgot also has really high base armor and MR, 60 of each. And that just helps Zeri be a lot more resilient to like random stuff that's going to be chipping her down in the form of like Sorc procs. I don't know, like maybe like random Vel'Koz, random Sona, like just random stuff hitting your Zeri. That extra little armor and MR from long distance pals is still going to be really good on Zeri even after the nerfs. So yeah, those are like standard stuff. Gifsel and Fallen, like any combat augment, any augment that gives you items are almost always going to be good with this comp. I will say Piltover Heart, Piltover Soul, Bruiser Heart gives a Vi. So like I'm talking about like these augments that give you like Piltover, right? Like Gunner Crown gives you a Jace, Bruiser Heart and Bruiser Crest give you a Vi. These are worth taking in the early game in 2-1 if it gives you Piltover. So like if I have Jace and Ori from stage 1, and they're giving me a Bruiser Heart, I'm just going to take that because that gives me a free Vi and I get 3 Piltover to start the game. Like that's just something like to look out for. Obviously Piltover Heart and Piltover Soul. Well, Soul gives you an Echo. You pretty much just need an Ori or a Vi and then you already have Piltover. It's like super easy to get online. So yeah, look out for those for sure. And then late game, level 9, the way to cap out this board is to do this generally. And I also wouldn't be too concerned about your synergy. So like in the case that like I said, oh, maybe you have Bruiser Heart, right? If you have Bruiser Heart and you have to play 3 Bruiser, it's not the end of the world because by the time you've gotten to the point where you need to play 3 Bruiser, like you're playing around Heimerdinger, you're playing around Scion, Urgot Zeri, you're playing around like an upgraded T-Hex. Like your board's gonna be so strong that like, yeah, you have 3 out of 2 Bruiser, but you also have one of the strongest boards in the game. So like who really cares if you're down an augment at that point in the game, right? So Piltover is just that good in the early game if you're able to stack it up. So definitely look out for those. And also it's completely okay to take out Bruiser as well. Say on level 8, I hit this board, I hit a Dinger really early. I can just take out my Vi. I know I lose 2 Bruiser, but I also get to play a Dinger on my board, which is something that's going to be obviously really strong. Oh, and real quick, like if you get Gunner +1, that you don't even need Senna or Tristana. If you get Gunner +1, it's actually really nice because on level 7, you can play 4 Gunner. So imagine if I just had a +1 Gunner here, let's just say Gunner. Say you just have like Gunner emblem on your Urgot, then you're playing 4 Gunner and this could just be level 7 board. You can literally donkey down to 0 every single turn, donkey roll down to 0 every single turn, upgrade your board and then go level 8 and you can still play Senna once again. It's like a trap that a lot of like players, especially newer players fall into is that they just like look too much at their synergy bar. If you have +1 Gunner and you're playing 5 out of 4 Gunner here because like, I don't know, you took Gunner for your level 7 board, but you still hit a Senna, it's like, you're not going to not play a Senna. It's not like Senna's not benefiting from your 4 Gunner as well, right? Like you're not any weaker. Like you could be stronger by perhaps taking a different augment, but obviously if you're taking Gunner +1, you're doing it for a reason, right? So like don't be afraid to play like 5 out of 4 Gunner. 3 out of 4 Gunner is bad, not because 3 is bigger than 2, but or like 3 is 1/2, but because like you do want to get to 4 Gunner just so that Zeri does more damage, right? So yeah, that's pretty much the video. These are going to be the 4 main comps. These 2 comps, I'm sure a lot of you guys are already super familiar with, so I don't even have to talk about them. I'll very quickly talk about this comp actually. This is like the Fast 9 comp. This is like the full legendary board. You will win the game if you hit this comp, but you also need 1 trillion gold to hit it. This is the strongest comp in the game, bar none. It's literally stronger than anything else you can play. This is going to be the comp you play if you have like level up to go level 9 really easily. You're literally just spending most of your gold on 9. Say you have like late game specialist and you're really healthy, you're streaking on 3-2, you take late game specialist, you go 9 with 50 gold. The thing is, you think you might be able to hit this board level 9 with 50 gold. You are not hitting this board level 9 with 50 gold. Just like imagine upgrading Ahri, upgrading Bel'Veth, upgrading Heimerdinger. That's already 45 gold. So like if you go 9 with 50 gold, sell your full board. Let's say you go from 50 gold to 100 or let's say 80 gold conservatively. You can upgrade like 4 of these and then you're out of gold. And that's assuming you rolled once and hit everything. Like you rolled once and hit 3 Ahris, 3 Bel'Veths, 3 Heimerdingers, and 3 Rise in one shop. You buy all of them, that's still 60 gold, right? Like that's just not something you can afford. So yeah, you do have to like figure out ways to like get into this. Oftentimes you're going to be playing intermediate units such as Sejuani, such as Lissandra, such as Swain is actually like really powerful because Swain pairs obviously gives you Ahri Sorc, but also pairs well with like J4 that you can just play randomly. Like these units you can play on pretty much any board. Obviously Sejuani's giving you Bruiser, Lissandra's giving you Invoker, sometimes Freljord if you're playing Sejuani. Jarvan's Jarvan, pretty much goes without saying. Swain, great synergy bot, a unit that you often have upgraded from the early mid game. So it's just like really solid. You want to have like a mana item on Ahri, whether that be Shojin or blue buff, +2 damage items. On Bel'Veth, you really just want RFC. Ideally, you have GA or QSS or both, and probably some sort of healing somewhere. Heimerdinger, Rise, and Senna items, I just put Shojin on all of them because Shojin is good on all of them. But like realistically, if these units have literally 0 items, it's gonna be fine. There are certain rises that can carry really hard. For example, Freljord, you do want to be putting like blue buff or Shojin on it. Noxus gives your entire team items, just really strong. Zon, if you can somehow get this board and then still build up a bank, if you get like items on Rise, you can even say, screw Ari, I'm playing Rise, but that's if you have like 50 gold on top of having this board, and then you just put like the JG, the death cap on Rise instead, and Zon Rise will carry you, but like once again, these are like pretty fringe scenarios. Generic frontline items, once again, I just put Vow on everyone, because I mean Vow's just too broken. Aatrox, you don't need to put any items on this guy. In fact, it's probably best that you don't. Same idea as before, I talked about it already. And yeah, that's the video. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to leave them in the comment sections down below. I'll be streaming on Twitch, maybe if not the day of the patch, then definitely the next day. And you can find me at twitch.tv/guubums. Otherwise, like and subscribe, leave a comment, or do whatever you do. I'll see you next time.